Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Happy Sunday, everyone. I am filming this on a Saturday morning. In fact, the Saturday morning before this goes up. I am having my coffee. I am trying to get myself together because it's been a rough couple of weeks. And I probably should insert this as a part of why I think my reading has been so scattered this month. It's a few factors, which we will talk about, but one of them is there's been this big restructuring at work, which I didn't know for sure was going to happen, but I kind of wondered. And then as time went on, it became more apparent, and it's just hard. I mean, I wasn't impacted and like my immediate team wasn't impacted, but a lot of people were that I work with, and you know, people who I was like on late night calls with like the week before trying to work things out on a project, like are, you know, it's sad, it's hard, it's sad. And so that's just been it's just a heavy environment. Like it just is sort of like that sword of Damocles over everyone. And it's not the look, sis. So that I think has been sort of distracting me a little bit. So I've still read a lot. I've read, I think 13 books so far, but a lot of those were romances or like really light things, or things like I was wrapping up just because I'm in progress on a lot, which we will talk about. So I've been having a hard time finishing things, basically, is what it comes down to, unless it's just something quite light. So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. I've not had a lot of things that like I've really not enjoyed reading so far this month. Like I've not had any big disappointments, but I wouldn't say I have like two things I'm going to mention as things I've really enjoyed so far, and everything else has been like good, but not like awesome, which I think is part of what also may be contributing to me being a little all over the place, having a harder time finishing. And you know what? Let me just stop teasing you and get into the substance of what I think is going on. So let's dive into what I have finished reading first. It is nonfiction November, so let's start with that stuff first. So I did read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which was on my classics TBR for the year. This was my nonfiction classic pick. I already know what next year's is going to be. Oh, guys, I've already started on all of my list making for the end of the year and all my planning for next year. You guys know your girl loves it. So anyway, this was the book I specifically picked for Nonfiction November when I was making my classics TBR. And I really enjoyed this. So if you know Virginia Woolf's work, you can probably guess what the prose style of this is, but it's Virginia Woolf channeling that prose style into basically an extended essay about the intersection between feminism and class/money. Now it's interesting because Virginia Woolf was quite a snob in real life, but this is a fascinating kind of examination of like what, like sort of the necessity of having financial independence and a certain kind of social class to be able to produce art. And I don't know that that's always true, but she makes a really interesting argument about that for women. So I can totally see why this is a classic. I really enjoyed it, and this was sort of like one of those like pieces of classic feminist literature I've been meaning to get to, and I'm glad that I've now encountered it. And it's really short, so it's easy to recommend to people. So I give this like 4 stars. Definitely enjoyed it. Another nonfiction pick I gave 4 stars to was Human in Death, Morality and Mortality in J.D. Robb's Novels by Kecia Ali. And if you guys watch this channel, you know that I have been on a real binge of the In Death series. We'll talk about a couple of other In Death entries. This is an almost 50-book series at this point, and this book was released after the 45th book was written, so I'd been waiting to get to that point before I read this one. And this was a really, like, this had so many interesting things it was talking about. I highlighted a lot of things, but basically this is talking about like what kind of moral universe does J.D. Robb sort of set up in her books. And it was really interesting. I think it talked a lot about the dynamics of like gender and love and the morality around that, which I thought was interesting. It does sort of address some of the tonal shifts in the series away from, this is a series that started in 1995, and at that point, romance was still very much dominated. Actually, Nora Roberts was a real innovator in getting us less alpha heroes as being normal in romance. That was one of, I think, her major contributions to the genre. Actually, another major, just as a side note, another major contribution of Nora Roberts to the romance genre is she is the one who really innovated having dual point of views. So prior to Nora Roberts, you were pretty much exclusively in the heroine's point of view, and now it is it's an exception that you're only in the heroine's point of view, or only in the hero's point of view is even more of an exception. You almost always have dueling point of views, and Nora Roberts is the one who like innovated that. And as a part of that, I would argue, because she was actually in the head of the hero, she made the heroes much less like sort of like flat and stereotypically cavemen. So her heroes were a real step forward in terms of making them real people who are less just like obsessed with dominating the heroine, and more nuanced, interesting, and more on the beta end. Anyway, all that to say, I think that this book does address the fact that in the 90s, even though Nora Roberts's heroes are much better than a lot of the contemporary heroes of that period, you know, Rourke and Eve, it starts off that Rourke is still kind of an asshole, and a little bit like it's interesting because Eve is such an alpha herself, and like, but he always has to be right in some ways, which I hate that trope. And that was my biggest problem with the series early on. But as they grow, they become much more partners that are equal, and it's much less that Rourke is always right and Eve is learning how to accommodate to him. So she talks about that. She talks about a lot of really interesting themes of that type, like those kinds of ideas in this book. One thing that I wish she had spent more time on is this is a series, because it is near future kind of sci-fi, is the setting. These books raise a ton of really interesting questions around things like bioethics, or like things that are really relevant to our life today with the ethics of like social media and like data information, like companies having that, all kinds of things like that. I think that there's a lot of interesting questions raised about that in this series. So it would have been interesting for her to kind of go down that hole, and she doesn't really very much, or like not as much as I was hoping, basically. But she talks about race, she talks about gender dynamics, she talks about class and money in the future. Anyway, this is a very thought-provoking book. I don't think it's like beautifully written, which keeps it from being like amazing, but there's a lot of really, like, if you're interested in the series, I think you would enjoy seeing a really serious literary study diving into what is a commercial fiction book that has a lot of meat on the bones for this kind of analysis. And then I did finish off Blessed by Kate Bowler, which was this is one of my 19 books I want to read in 2019. I finally finished this. I've been working on it for 5 years, and I liked it. So I would give this 3.5 stars, because I do think that the writing is a little dry, and I think that you can tell this started as a dissertation and got turned into a book. But this is very interesting. It's a history of the American prosperity gospel, and I think, so this was written in 2014. I think this book has only gotten more interesting and more relevant, because I come out of a very conservative, like fundamentalist evangelical tradition. That was the school I went to, and so that was sort of the religion I was inculcated with as a kid. And if you know anything about that kind of conservative Christianity or conservative Protestantism, you will know that evangelicals traditionally have been very skeptical of the prosperity gospel. And I would describe the prosperity gospel as essentially as a syncretic movement, kind of fusing evangelical spirituality with American exceptionalism and American capitalism. It's an extremely American religion that has then been exported globally, unfortunately, I would say, because I think this is really pernicious in a lot of ways. But it's interesting because traditionally, like the fundamentalists or like the more mainstream evangelicals have been super like hypercritical of this type of prosperity gospel, which is basically saying like, if you are good, God will bless you. But with the current administration, that this kind of message is such, like, just plays exactly into Trump, because Trump is very American. I mean, I would argue Trump is sort of the embodiment of a lot of the worst parts of being an American. I'm proud to be an American, but we have our flaws, and I think he embodies a lot of them. And so it makes actually a lot of sense that this type of religion, where wealth is a sign of blessing and like being chosen, would appeal to him. And so he has brought a lot of those figures into his administration as his religious advisors. And so it has sort of forced evangelicals to be more cozy with this strain, this like syncretic strain of their religion. So that has been a very interesting dynamic. So anyway, all that to say, I think it was interesting with that lens to then read the history of this. And there's just so many like over the top characters in the history of the prosperity gospel. So anyway, this was very interesting. It just was as a book, it's not excellent, but the content was very interesting. And this, by the way, I chose this for my design challenge because I thought that the cover design of this was just amazing. So that was my design challenge for Nonfiction November, and it was on my 19 books I want to read in 2019. And then for the voice challenge for Nonfiction November, I read She Said, and that is definitely my favorite thing I have read so far. I did that as audio. I bought that as an audiobook, and it was really good. It's interesting because I read Catch and Kill last month, and one thing, like a question that came to my mind, and I wanted to mention it here to you guys, is do you need to read both? And of course you don't need to read anything, but I would recommend reading both. I think they both have interesting things to say, and I want to like sit with my thoughts on this a little bit longer, so I probably will do most of my discussion of this at the end of the month, but I do want to mention that the ending of this book made me feel so seen, and it made me weep. Oh, it was so good. The epilogue of this was worth the entirety of the book. And second, I do want to just mention, because I was talking about Catch and Kill as a book I also enjoyed, and I liked both of them. I think Catch and Kill is more just sort of like propulsively readable. So if I was going to recommend one to the casual reader, probably I would recommend Catch and Kill, just based on the type of story it's trying to tell is a little bit different than She Said, but they are both excellent. And it made me think about how so these are both accounts, if you don't know, of the Harvey Weinstein scandal and how it was exposed. These two different reporting teams, basically, Ronan Farrow and his producer, and Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor at the New York Times. Both of them were working on the story at the same time, and both basically, like, the New York Times did the initial expose, and then Ronan Farrow followed up with a more even more intense allegations in the New Yorker just a few weeks after that. So it's the story of how both of them were getting the story. But one thing that just reading both of them back to back made me think about is the fact that, so Ronan Farrow is gay. And he also has quite a bit of privilege. He's Mia Farrow's son and Woody Allen's son, though, like, I'm going to tell you that the first time I saw his picture, I assumed he was Frank Sinatra's kid. And then I found out later he wasn't. So I don't know. That's a whole thing, and beside the point. But anyway, all that to say, he comes from like this celebrity family. He has a lot of privilege, but he, like, women in general, because he is a gay man, is in a posture where he can kind of critique the patriarchy, or he is a little bit outside of the typical good old boys kind of club. And I think seeing him describe that in his book, where there were times where I think people were trying to kind of bring him into that, Powerful Men at NBC and other places, I think the fact that he was able to kind of step out of that, and then definitely Jodi Kantor, Megan Twohey, and then their editor was also a woman, being outside and able to critique these cycles of patriarchal oppression, of silencing women, of all of this, it just reminded me, basically all of this reminded me that, like, those of us who are on the outside of being the beneficiaries of a very narrow definition of like what it means to be a man and traditional masculinity, like, we all gotta stick together. Like, I guess basically all this to say is, like, I think that Ronan Farrow was able to critique this somewhat because he is a gay man and able to see outside of these traditional patterns a little bit. Like, it reminds me that those of us who are able to critique or be a little bit outside of traditional spheres of power, we gotta stick together. Like, queer men, we need you. We gotta support, I think we got mutual support. We can lend each other. I think places where we can have empathy and see places where we've been disadvantaged because of race or class or not fitting in the right way or whatever, hopefully we can use that to expand our empathy. And I think it's cool. I just was reflecting on the fact that I think it's cool that we've got these two books coming out at the same time, and how they speak to each other a little bit. And I don't know, it just made me think about solidarity basically. So I really enjoyed She Said. Like I was saying, I think at the end of the month I'll have more to say about that, but in general I really enjoyed the experience of having read both of them. I gave both of them 4 stars, and I would say the combined experience of reading both is more like a 4.5 overall for me. But anyway, that was definitely my favorite nonfiction book. So let's transition into other things. So my other favorite thing that I read this month were a trio of romance novels from Noelle Adams. I just got in a real Noelle Adams kick. And something that I want to mention, because I have not tried to read this much physical nonfiction in a long time. Like, I've been very much on the audio train for nonfiction for the last few years. I haven't really tried to do that since grad school. And what it's reminding me of is the fact that I struggle, like, I have a hard time getting through nonfiction in physical form at a very efficient rate. And it makes me like have to take breaks with very light things. So I've ended up reading a lot of romance this month, basically to break up the nonfiction. And so it was just making me reflect on the fact that it used to be that it was harder for me to get through as many books. And that's because I was reading a lot more nonfiction when I was growing up. And like, because especially I was mentioning earlier, I come from like the evangelical fundamentalist tradition. There's a huge tradition of reading for like self-improvement and like devotion and spirituality. And that used to be a huge part of what I was reading. And I would need to break it up with things. And that's why I think a big part of why I used to not get through as many books. Also because my reading speed definitely picked up with grad school and a couple of other things. But anyway, it was making me reflect on the fact that my patterns of reading have changed a lot, and that has definitely contributed to the volume of books that I now get through. Anyway, all that to say, Noelle Adams was is definitely my favorite thing I've been breaking up things with. So I read her whole little trilogy of like trophy husbands, I think is what it's called. So the first one's called Part-Time Husband, then there was Practice Husband, then there was Packaged Husband. I think the first one was probably my favorite, the first or the third. And they're just really fun marriage of convenience tropes where like fake marriage, like these women, these trio of sisters have a really controlling granddad, and like each of them has reasons of basically like he wants them to get married, so they're like finding people to basically like check that box for them so that they can kind of like get out from under his thumb a little bit. So they're all supposed to just be married for like a year, and each of the dudes that they've picked already kind of has a thing for them that they didn't realize, and you know, slowly but surely like it turns into a real marriage, and it's just cute. It's a trope that I really like, and Noelle Adams is just one of my favorite romance authors. Like, she's not for everyone. I think she has a level of, I don't want to call it realism because that's not quite it. I think she doesn't have the same kind of like frothy quality to her writing that some romance novelists do. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something about her style of writing that I find incredibly comforting. Her people tend to be in very, like, this is sort of the exception. A lot of times her characters are very like average people. There's nothing like super exceptional about them. There's not a ton of like incredibly good looking men, incredibly gorgeous women. Like, a lot of times they're just sort of like more average Joes or Joettes. Anyway, I really love the way she does contemporary romances, and these have just been like hitting the spot in terms of just like a good comfort read and a good way to break up kind of my nonfiction reading. Okay, other things I've been breaking up my nonfiction reading with, I'll mention two. One is In the Hall with the Knife by Diana Peterfreund. Could this be more in my wheelhouse? It could not. This is an adaptation. This is going to be a trilogy of YA mystery adaptations of the board game Clue/Cluedo, depending on where you live. And these are isolated closed circle mysteries with the characters we all know and love. Mr. Body is here. I bet you can guess what happens to him. They're all at this elite boarding school. There is like the snowstorm of the century that traps them all into this big house, and shit happens. And this is not excellent, but it's just so up my alley that I did enjoy it. It was really fun. Like, this is really fun YA mystery, and I give it 3.5 stars because, like, objectively it's not the best, but I just had a really good time reading it. I will definitely continue in the series. And it just was an enjoyable little romp. So I definitely enjoyed, this was a good thing to break up my nonfiction reading. Also, I read another in-depth book, which was Dark in Death. And this one was good. Like, I gave this 3 stars because I just have like a high standard for the in-depth books, and I would call this, for an in-depth book, a B, and therefore a 3-star. But this was perfectly enjoyable. This was a serial killer is using an author's books to serial kill. trope, and it was well executed. It just wasn't like, it wasn't one of the best ones in the series, but I had a really fun time reading this. I always love spending time with these characters. It was good, just not the best. So this was, oh gosh, I think this is 46 in the series, and that will transition nicely into things that I am currently reading, because I am currently in the middle of Leverage in Death, which is 47, which has like a suicide bomber thing happening. So this is what I'm working on right now. I want to mention, I am in progress on so many things right now. I was alluding to this at the beginning of the video, and then when we were talking about how nonfiction is slowing me down a little bit. I think because I've been sort of scattered at work, I've been really struggling to finish things. And so it's made me like put things aside. So for instance, I decided to go ahead and put this to the side for right now, because while I'm liking it, I'm not loving it, and I think I would enjoy it more in a different frame of mind. So I'm pushing pause on this, which, you know, I now at least have a sense of what it is. And I may come back to it at some point. I have the audio, which I like. It's well done. It's read by Richard Armitage, so there you go. So David Copperfield, I'm gonna DNF for now. This is like a one strike situation. If you've heard me talk about that in the past. And then similarly, I also ended up DNFing Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This was a buddy read with Leanna at Leanna's Library and Chris. I forget what Chris's handle is. I'll see if I can figure that out and put it in the description. But this is good, but I thought this was going to be sort of like more YA fantasy, like that's written for older audiences, because that's how YA is now. It's actually written for adults and like older people, but whatever. This reminds me very much in tone of the YA fantasy of my youth that was not written as complexly. So this reminds me a lot of Howl's Moving Castle in terms of sort of the tone and the writing style. And I believe Leanna told me that the author is a huge fan of that book, so that makes sense to me. I think that I will like this. That wasn't what I thought I was getting, so I was just having really a difficult time kind of getting traction with it. So I think I got like 70 pages into this and was like, you know what? I think I could like this, and I don't want to force myself to keep reading and know that I'm not getting into it, kind of a thing. So I'm also giving this a one strike, and I will come back to it at some point. But it just wasn't quite what I was in the mood for. I'm in progress on, let's see, I'm in progress on Not All Dead White Men by Donna Zuckerberg, which again is good, but not great. I'm gonna guess I'll end up giving this 3.5 stars, but the content is enjoyable. I'm just not fully connecting with it the way that I thought I might. But you know, good. In progress on that. I'm replacing this with an actual middle grade book. I am going to finish Nevermore this month. Damn it. I will. So I'm already halfway through, and so I want to polish that off. And then I'm also in progress on Charged by Emily Bazelon, which is good, but I'm just sort of a goldfish this month, and I'm struggling to like focus on it to finish it. And then Parkland by David Cullen. Broken record, good. Struggling to focus on it to finish. And then Braiding Sweetgrass by Robb Wall Kimmerer. This I have been using almost like a devotion in the morning, or like a poetry reading to like start my day. I listened to like one chapter of it. The writing of this is just so beautiful. Like, I cannot communicate to you strongly enough how beautifully this is written. This is sort of an exploration of indigenous ways of knowing and how that corresponds to like more Western scientific ways of knowing, and how those things coalesce. And it's just beautiful. Oh, it's some of the best nature writing I've ever read. It's just really good. So I'm enjoying that and purposefully slow walking it, but I'm still in progress on that. So as you can see, I have a lot going on at the moment. If I can finish some of those, I do have like a whole stack of things here that I also am trying to get to. So I have once we get past Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, which is when you are watching this in like a week and a half. Once we get past that, it will be time for me to focus on Christmassy things. And so the two Christmas or like snowy mysteries that I want to read are A Christmas Place by Georgette and Death and the Dancing Footman by Neo Marsh. These are both isolated close circle mysteries, and I think I will enjoy them. So this is going to help me get in a more wintry, festive mood. Over Thanksgiving, my book is going to be Kill Creek, because this was scaring me last month and I need to be in the house with someone when I read it. So I'm going to take this to my mom's house and read it while I'm staying with her. One of my 19 books I want to read in 2019 books is Difficult Women by Roxane Gay, which I'm also hoping that I can get to this month or early next month. I really want to read this. I just need to sit down and kind of focus on it. But this is also on the list. And then in terms of romances that I'm going to pick up to break up my nonfiction reading, I have The Right Swipe by Alicia Ray, and I need to get to this because I just got approved for the sequel to this, which is Girl Gone Viral, which comes out in April. So I want to read the first one. I think that I will enjoy this, like contemporary romance with like a technology bit to it is something that I tend to like. So there's that. I also need to listen to The Governess Game by Tessa Dare because that's the last book I need for this little video that I'm doing that's coming out here in a couple weeks. So I needed to listen to that. And then I just bought, because I had a $5 ebook credit, I used it to buy the last Lindsay Sands Highlander book I didn't have. I don't remember, I think it's called Capturing the Highlander. I don't remember. I remember the cover because the glisten on the man titty on this cover is next level. Like, this cover went above and beyond. This is why I e-read most of my romances. So those are the romances I think I'll try to get to. And then in terms of my last picks that I'm trying to finish up for Nonfiction November, so Essays in Understanding by Hannah Arendt. I also want to read this because this is on my 19 books I want to read in 2019. So I want to finish that off. The other book that is on that 19 books I want to read in 2019 list is Born Again Bodies, Flesh and Spirit in American Christianity by R. Marie Griffith. And this will address the truth challenge for the Nonfiction November challenges. And then this is the sport challenge. So if I get to both of those, I would be happy. And then my last physical one, I had said I was going to be pursuing Happiness, but I forgot that I really wanted to read Beyonce in Formation this year, which is Remixing Black Feminism. I really would like to read this. So I think I'm going to say that if I get a chance instead of this one, I'm going to go with this. So that's enough to be getting on with, right? We'll see how many of these I actually end up finishing, because like I said, I've been a little bit of a goldfish, but it's been interesting kind of revisiting my relationship with nonfiction when I try to physically read so many of them at one time. That is sort of a new insight that I've had into how that affects my reading speed and patterns. So anyway, self-discovery is a lifelong journey. Okay. I think that will do it for now for what I'm reading and what I might read next. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you are reading right now. If there's anything that you've read that you've really enjoyed so far this month, definitely let me know in the comments. And yeah, I think that will do it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.